Made on Market Studio, Episode 3. It's really hard to make art when you're surviving. Welcome back to Made on Market Studio. Tonight I am doing some mending, which feels appropriate for what I plan to talk about. I've been thinking a lot lately about creative identity, what it means to call yourself an artist, and what claims you're making when you say you're an artist, and what happens when you let that go, and how you find your way back to it. So if you're watching the video along with this podcast, I will be working on mending a dress for a friend, and I also will just, let my free association happen and see where this takes us. So this friend is actually a colleague of mine, and the dress belongs to her. She found it and really liked it. She'd been looking for something like this, and it has a small tear in it. So she knew that when she purchased it, and she figured she probably knew somebody who could fix it. And she texted me and says, "Hey, do you sew?" And as a matter of fact, friend, I do. So I told her that I would take care of this for her. And I really enjoy mending for myself, for other people. It's one of those skills that came out of necessity, actually. I've lost and gained the same weight a few times in my life. And at some of those times, I genuinely couldn't afford to replace my clothing. So I fixed them up and took them in and then let them out again. And it's also come in handy buying things secondhand and being able to repair them. I've had a number of items come into my home that had maybe a small tear or a loose seam or a missing button, and I'm not I wasn't at the time proficient by any means, but sufficient, and that was enough. So mending is like such a metaphor and a parallel to anti-consumerism, which the whole premise being like this thing still has value and it just needs some attention. Rather than throwing it away and buying something new, I take the time to repair it and give it more life. And I think that applies to a lot more than just clothing. I also have a coat to mend on deck that I owe to an acquaintance, and I have been anxious about finishing it, which I know, very on brand. She bought this coat secondhand and was very excited about it. It's a nice brand, good quality winter coat, which is something we need here in New England. And one of the first times she was wearing it, she stood too close to a fire and melted some of the exterior. She found out that I do mending through a group that we're both a part of and asked if I could help. So I said yes, we agreed on a price, and then I told her it would be about 2 weeks before I could get to it. And in that time, I was diagnosed with tendonitis in my thumb and my wrist, and I had to literally put everything I was working on down, and she was incredibly gracious about it. So she knew it would be a while before I got it back to her. The issue is I have just now not finished it, and then in trying to get it done, I messed something up and had to remove a seam and fix it so that the zipper wasn't impeded. And all of this to say, I have just now been sitting here with this guilty feeling, which is just a very efficient anxiety spiral that has continued to get it worked up in my head now to the point where, because I've had it so long, it's going to have to be so incredibly perfect and like the most beautiful mend that she has ever seen in her entire life, because otherwise, why did I have it for so long? And so I'm feeling so many shades of average that I can't even begin to pick it up. Anyway, one thing at a time. I'm working on the dress, and that's why we're here, right? You might be interested to know the actual story of how I became a quilter, and it starts at the library, which, again, on brand, twice in one episode. Here we go. When I moved across the country, we can call it a fresh start because that's what it was, I didn't bring my sewing machines with me. The machine that I had in my former apartment was inexpensive and easy to replace, and I didn't have space for the big vintage machine that had been my grandmother's that lived at my mom's house. So I figured if I wanted one later, I could get another. And after living here and going through my first winter and realizing I needed a winter hobby, I decided to try my hand at quilting. And I didn't have a machine, so I borrowed one from my local library. And I know it's so hard not to love this story, right? The library has a sewing machine available for checkout. It's not in super popular demand, as it turns out. And so I checked it out again and just renewed it as many times as they let me. And I had it for about 3 weeks, and I made a bunch of little gifts for Christmas. And I just grew from making these small quilted bags and accessories to making a full-blown quilt, and it became a thing. So that's the origin story: a library sewing machine and a lot of time in a new place with long winters and not a lot of friends, and a new life taking shape and reclaiming some of my creative artistry because I wasn't doing a lot of painting and I was having a lot of feelings about that. So once I was well on my way, my mom and my partner conspired to get me my own sewing machine as a gift so I could give the library theirs back, which was great. And I am honestly getting to the point where I'm thinking about upgrading my machine now, which is an expense that we have not discussed yet in our household. So to my partner, if you're listening to this, hi. My first quilt was made from my wedding dress, not this marriage, a previous one. And I took that dress apart piece by piece. I ripped all of the seams. I separated the tulle. I took the beading off. I took the embroidery off. And it was separated out into the different elements that then I wanted to create something new with, and mixed in some fabrics that I really loved, really bright rainbow colors. And I made a totally new rainbow and white quilt. Something for this home, for this partnership, for this version of me that now exists and has grown and is a quilter. I am not going to go a lot more about that now because that chapter of my life is actually not fully mine to share, and I don't know how much of it I want to share in this podcast in this type of way. But I will say that taking that dress apart was one of the most cathartic things I've ever done. It took me a number of days over a long weekend, and I absolutely savored every moment of deconstruction, and then the making of something beautiful out of those pieces was the next most cathartic thing I've done. And that all is just so descriptive of my life and my experience being an artist. I used to paint. When I first started, I learned watercolor and I really loved it. I dabbled a little bit in acrylics, and then I found oil painting, and then I really began to love it. I have always been crafty my whole life, and I've always loved making things with my hands, but painting was something I felt like I was really genuinely learning and growing in. I took a couple of intro classes, adult ed classes, and I watched a lot of YouTube tutorials. I tried to absorb as much as I could about color theory and mixing, and I really started to spread my wings and create things for an audience and not just for myself. So that was genuinely when I felt like an artist, and I certainly still had a day job. I wasn't a working artist, or I was a working artist. I wasn't an artist only for my work. So that was something that was a fulfilling hobby and vocation that helped pay some of the bills and offset basically just buying more materials. So when I went through my difficult season, I stopped making most of my art. And when I did paint, outside of very specific projects that were small and easy for me to accomplish, I really didn't like what I was making. I didn't enjoy the process. It was hard. I felt way too discerning. I didn't like what I saw in my completed works. And so I just kind of realized then, and looking back even more so, it's amplified. It's really hard to make art when you're surviving, right? When you're going through it, whatever it is for you, that is not, for me, a time when I feel that I can create or be inspired. I don't know if this resonates for other artists, but it must not. I know for some people, art is how you cope, and they make things to process the hard stuff, to get through it. And I have so much respect for that. That is not me. When I am in survival mode, the art goes quiet. I don't access it the same way. I process it afterwards when I'm feeling good again, and then that becomes a whole other thing. For a few good years, right before and during the move, and then starting over in this new place, I went through fits and starts of making art and trying to access where I had been as an artist, the feeling and also the output. But I was still just surviving. And the art was there sometimes, but like sometimes it also felt sloppy and not true of myself. And the things that I was making were maybe commercially appealing, things that I thought people would maybe want to buy. But then I wasn't making art that felt authentic, and I didn't like what I was making. And so then when not a lot of it sold, that amplified all of this even more. So it just was not a good time or period in my journey as an artist, I guess, because really it should have been a time for like continuing to rest and not feel like I had to create output. And instead I just continued to be upset with the output I was making. And it really ties back to something real about the traits I have and who I am. Precision and control are things I strive for, and especially in my work, in my personal projects. And that's a place where the anxiety lives, right? If I can make it perfect, I'll have less to worry about because it will go well and I can relax. So if there's this big thing that I carry, if there's this big project that I'm working on, the pressure of my own personality mixed with not liking what I'm making, it makes me not want to make anything at all. And it just becomes, when I am stalled, I stay stalled. But by the flip side, when I have momentum, I stay in momentum. So now I'm in a season of thriving, right? I'm in a season of blossoming. Things in my artistic psyche are waking up after a lot of years of hibernation, and it feels really great. It feels really expansive. I feel like I want to capitalize on as much of it as possible. And either my art has actually gotten better, or I am just like completely revolted by it. Both feel like a win, so I'm not really going to question that. And, I didn't always call myself an artist. I said that I was always very crafty, and I think that probably people would tell me I was artistic, but not having taken art classes, having really only dabbled in like musical or performing arts, I never had like a fine arts kind of knowledge base to pull from. So I started making paintings and doing tutorials, and then maybe after like a few months of that, I started to think, yeah, I'm an artist, like not a great one, a novice one, but I'm an artist. And I took that title pretty quickly. I had no qualms with that. And when I went through my dry spell, that identity kind of went quiet, and I didn't really associate as artist as a title or a personifier for a good stretch of time. And there's this creative individual that I used to follow, Viana Novus, I think is how they pronounce their name. They have this whole body of work around the idea that living itself, because we are human beings, is a creative act. That being a human being actively is being. That in and of itself is the creativity. Breathing, existing, making choices, all of that is creative. And I held on to a piece of that, like an adjacent thought of that in particular, during the time when I wasn't making art and I was exploring how I could, still have that identity. You don't have to make good art to be an artist, right? Like you just have to make art. Good is subjective. And so some days when I'm struggling to make art and wishing that I were making it, I'll make bad art intentionally. I'll go into it with the goal that this art is not for public consumption. I'll scribble, I'll journal, I'll use pens or markers that I don't particularly care for, or are drying out, or aren't colors I enjoy, knowing that the end result isn't going to be something that I like. And a lot of the time it is really bad. Like, I'll be real. But sometimes something raw comes out, especially with things like poetry or journaling, like by free association, just writing in a flow state. Sometimes really tender or fearful or true feelings that I didn't know were sitting there right under the surface, things that I didn't have the ability to quite articulate. That's what comes out in those moments. And sometimes that's what I need, right? Like, that's the processing that is necessary to like get out of that feeling of not being able to create. And I think what art does at its core, it's not a mirror, but it's allowing you to be your own mirror. Because sometimes, even when we're sharing how we're feeling with words, those words don't translate in the same way. When I say I'm not feeling good, that means something different to me than when my husband says it or when my friend says it. Good is subjective. And so not feeling good is subjective as well. But if I make something, if I put it into colors on a canvas, into fabric, I can show what I'm feeling without having to translate it into words. And whatever I make, another person is going to experience in their own way. So it's similar where I don't actually know if the person is still going to understand what I am putting out there, but they can see my most tangible version of it. And that is the part of art that feels intimate. That is what feels special and scary. And I'm learning what that looks like, to share in that way anyway, and to share it confidently, and not just with the handful of people that know me best. And part of that story, not a huge part, because it's something I inherently don't feel needs to be a big deal, but a real part is that I jokingly refer to my body of work as big gay art. And I'm not gay, I'm bisexual. And that's something that hasn't been particularly hard for me to accept about myself internally, but it is something that I sometimes struggle to share because I don't always feel like it's relevant to mention, because I'm in a heteronormative relationship. And so sometimes it feels like an overshare, or as I hear the young people are saying, I don't want to be a pick-me. And I think that pseudo-suppression of this part of myself has led me to subconsciously make all of my really big gay art. I have a wall hanging. That was the first big piece. And the quilt that I have talked about in episode 2 that went to the fair is a rainbow. The quilt that was made for my first wedding dress, I added all rainbow colors to it and kept that motif. So lots of my art has rainbow motif. Pretty much all of it does, honestly. And I think that having art as an outlet to make whatever it is I feel like making, whenever I feel like making it, lets me be more authentic to myself when I don't always have the language for it, or the platform for it, or the comfort level to share it otherwise. The art that I make gets to be fully me, even when I'm not sure how or if I want to be fully me out loud. Being able to communicate through art is something that clearly I come back to when I am in time of not being able to articulate because I'm not even sure how I'm processing or reacting to things, and in instances where I just don't know if it is safe or relevant for me to share this part of myself. I'm sure I'm not alone in this. There are almost certainly people who have pieces of themselves that art has helped uncover, maybe before they even know it about themselves. Or maybe you're like me and you don't always have the knowing or the need to have to share something about yourself yet. And I think that is one of the things that makes art really special, right? That sometimes the art knows before we do, that the art is sometimes more freeing and more accepting of our true selves than we are. And maybe that's why some people choose not to call themselves artists or choose not to participate in art because they don't like what comes out. There's a lot there. And for myself, it's been a true joy to discover, even when it feels difficult or maybe a little bit scary. I've been thinking about what it means to come back to yourself creatively after having a long time of not tapping into that creativity. It definitely doesn't happen all at once. It's, for me at least, been a bunch of small reclamations. And then, you turn around, you look back, and all of a sudden it feels like it happened fast because you have all these things behind you that you're doing that are artistic or creative. For me, the trajectory was using that library sewing machine, making a quilt for the fair just to see what would happen, putting that same quilt up at the library where people I know could see it, applying for a grant with my name on it to do a community project, starting a podcast that I am very much making up as I go because I've felt so inspired by people in my life telling me that they see me in a season of really having a lot to share. And each of those things has been a step toward reclaiming I'm still here. This part of me is still here. It still has value. It just needed some attention. I am an artist, and I have been an artist this whole damn time. And maybe that's relatable, even if you're not an artist, even if you've never been one. Maybe there's something else you're struggling with that, is there a part of you that's been quiet? Is there an identity, a way of being that somewhere along the way you've had to step away from? Was it because you too were surviving? Maybe you felt too exposed. Maybe you tried to share and it didn't land the way you hoped. Maybe you're just now discovering it for the first time about yourself. What would it look like to reclaim that? Not all the way, just a small piece. If you are creative, make the bad poem. Check out the library sewing machine. Find the thing that used to be yours or that you're finding out for the first time is yours and hold it. Resonate with it just for a little bit. You don't have to share it with anyone. You can make it just for you. And if you are an artist, sharing your art is sharing yourself. And that's scary. And that's okay. The dress is mended. I think it looks really good, actually. I'm really pleased with it. I still have that coat to finish, which I really want to work on this weekend. Not succumbing to the anxiety. Allowing myself to be a little messy. And even when things are unfinished, that just means they're in a position to become finished. Go make something bad on purpose. See what comes out. Until next time, from Made on Market Studio. If you like this podcast, please consider checking out previous episodes. Already have? Subscribe for future updates on YouTube, Substack, and more. Check out madeonmarketstudio.com.